going to get started. So this is a session entitled, oh, wait a second. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Dr. Madeline Ratoza, and we're introducing a video presentation entitled Career Planning and Financial Literacy for Families. And this is part of a series focused on career planning and financial literacy with this as a special topic. And I'll let our other presenters introduce themselves.
Dr. F. Scott Feil, teach for the DPT Flex program at the Austin campus. I'm transitioning over into the new Senior Learning and Development Specialist position. But spent a good 17, 18 years as a practicing PT before switching over to academia in the last 3 years. And from there, I've really focused on business and starting your own business and all things student loan debt and figuring out how to pay off those student loans. So happy to be here tonight with the crew.
Hello, my name is Fabian Bizama. I am at the DPT program in Austin, and I'm the assistant program director. And my background is both as a clinician and leadership background in the PT and rehab field. And I'm interested in this topic because I think it's important for our students and professionals to be informed and take the opportunity to leverage some of the tools that are available to plan for things such as the family.
Awesome. And I guess I should explain a little bit more about why I'm in this topic. So I am faculty in the Austin campus. Before I joined academia, I worked across the healthcare field in inpatient, outpatient, home health, pediatrics, geriatrics. And in that time, I worked for about 6 years before coming to academia. I had 2 children and experienced what it was like to go through the maternity leave process in a number of different ways in both outpatient and home health and inpatient. So wanted to share some knowledge with students because it is something I think that is often not talked about. And then when you get out into the field, you're sort of left to your own devices to figure it out. So we're providing a little bit of context, sharing some information as well as some experiences to help you as you get out into the field in healthcare and want to also grow your career and start your families. So this is what we'll be covering today. We're going to talk about paid leave options, childcare situations, benefits for spouses, career growth, and a Q&A for anyone that is present. So when we talk about first, the salary options after the birth of a child. So if you are either the person giving birth or perhaps the person even adopting a child or needing leave to take care of some sort of family member, you can have leave through a number of different ways. One is through paid family leave. PFL is a sort of short for that. And this may be through your organization or that is through a state-sponsored program. And in the next couple of slides, we'll talk about sort of more in detail about all of these things. And short-term disability is an income replacement insurance. So you are generally either paying into the insurance yourself or your company pays into that insurance for you. And that'll vary based on the organization you're part of. And in paying into this insurance, it works as any other insurance would. You pay a monthly premium, and then when you go on leave, you're paid a percentage of your salary. And that percentage will vary based on your organization as well as your state programs. And then you can also save for this on your own. So depending on the calculation for what it costs to pay into short-term disability, whether or not your state or your organization offers paid family leave, it may be cost effective for you to save that money separately. And as we get through the options, we will talk a little bit more about that. So we'll have an opportunity for pausing here in a second. So workers across the nation are not guaranteed a single day of paid family leave by federal law. So any parental leave, which includes multiple types of leave, including bonding with a new child, or maternity leave, paternity leave, or bonding leave, or it could include deployment-related leave, safe leave, etc. So these are all sort of included, and none of this is guaranteed by federal law. When we look at the distribution, we can see that the states in red are with no paid family leave laws. The states in blue are states with laws but no programs that are active. And we are all currently based in Texas. And I can verify that that is absolutely true. There is absolutely no programs that are active in Texas that are state sponsored. And then we have active paid family leave laws in California, Washington, and the other pink states on our East Coast. We see that nice pink region in the Northeast, and then a couple in sort of the Southeast. So this is of course available to all of our University of St. Augustine programs. We see our Californians in pink, they have paid family leave options. Usually it's about 4 months of paid leave that's guaranteed by the state, versus Texas and Florida, we do not have any guaranteed leave options. Anything else you guys want to chime in on paid family leave?
I think it's also an example of additional factors that would influence our professional life and why it's important to stay active in the process, from representing our profession, but also be engaged in the political process, right? Because these are laws and regulations that are set up at different governmental levels, and we all have a responsibility and an opportunity to express our opinion and vote accordingly as well.
Yeah, well put. When I worked in North Carolina, we had FMLA, Family Medical Leave Assistance, I guess it was. And that was just through our hospital system. We had a very large hospital system that was all across the state of North Carolina and has now expanded into Virginia and South Carolina as well. And it was a large enough system where they did have an FMLA in place, but that was that was it as far as the state of North Carolina went, as far as I knew back when I was working there. So was not very active, wasn't very helpful for me. I actually ended up not taking too much paternity leave. I think I took 2 weeks off, and that was basically just PTO. So would not recommend that if you can go a different route, for sure.
Absolutely. And one thing to also consider is I went to school in California, have a lot of friends still in California. And so when you're considering if you're looking at where to work, of course, you have this guaranteed state-sponsored paid family leave in states like California and Washington. But when we're thinking about career planning, finances, and all of that, how are those paid family leave programs funded? Well, they're funded through tax dollars. And so we know that in states like California, they have much higher state taxes. They have state and federal taxes, where in the state of Texas, we don't have state income tax. And so, I'll talk to my friends going through this in California, and they say, well, it's paid for. I'm like, well, yes, but you also contribute to paying for that in your state income tax. So it's a complicated discussion, of course, but just something to consider where the money's coming from. If you are in a state that is red or blue, you will not have that guaranteed by the state, although it could be guaranteed by your company. You may have leave options, right? And you might be able to get off time, but is that paid through your company? That's another consideration. So as we move into short-term disability, so this is essentially insurance for going on a short-term disability leave, which is either between It's usually less than a 12-week span. When we're looking at pregnancy specifically, it's either 6 or 8 weeks. Generally, if you have a C-section, it is up to 8 weeks. And then if you give birth in the traditional manner, you would have 6 weeks of short-term disability in most plans. It operates as an insurance plan. So somebody is paying a premium. In some organizations, that premium is paid 100% by the organization. In most of what I've experienced in healthcare, interestingly, the employee pays into the insurance. So it could be $100 a month. It could be $100 a pay period. You're paying the premium to the short-term disability. And that number will vary based on the organization and the plan that your organization has bought into. So the timing, of course, of this matters because the insurance organization that covers your short-term disability is not going to cover a pre-existing condition. So if you are pregnant and you take a new job and that new job comes with short-term disability and you are already pregnant at the time that your job starts, you pay into that for 8 months, you have a baby, that short-term disability will not cover your leave because you were pregnant prior to starting that position. And so that's where the timing can be difficult because we can't often plan for pregnancies. So as an example, I started working at an outpatient clinic that had no paid leave by the company. So everything I paid towards short-term disability was from my own paycheck. I was planning on having kids quite soon. So I started paying into that short-term disability right off the bat. It took 4 years for me to have my first child. So I had paid short-term disability that entire period. And then I only got back, it's a percentage of your salary, which in this case was about 60%. So I actually kind of lost money in the grand scheme of things because I was paying into a short-term disability program for 4 years, where I got 60% of my salary for 8 weeks of time off. So had I gotten the job, paid for 8 months of short-term disability from my paycheck, then had a baby right away, I would have obviously made my money back. But there's some of that is very unpredictable when it comes to pregnancy. And if you are going to transition jobs, so say you're working in one company in the period of time in which you are hoping to start a family, and then you transition in the middle of that, you have to then consider that timing as it relates to your leave. So at the time where I did get pregnant with my first child, my company was bought out when I was 3 months pregnant. So had I left that company at that time period, I would have not been covered on my new short-term disability plan. So while I didn't want to stay at that company because it was a new company, I had to stay for 6 more months, or I simply wouldn't get paid for that time. And I had already paid in 3.5 years to that disability program. That's kind of worst case scenario happened in my situation. Now, this can be, again, you can have all of these options where employers pay the full premium, both employers and employee pays part of the premium. You can have different purchase options. That's a conversation with your HR department when you come into an organization. And something that you can definitely, if you're being hired and you're deciding on 2 jobs, to look at those options. What do your options for benefits? What's the cost for premium? What is the employer contributing to that? And things like that. And again, wage replacement can be as low as 40% or up to 70%. But if you're making $70,000 a year, you're never going to make that full salary for that time period. It's always going to be a percentage of your earnings. So also important to note. A couple more considerations where I talked about timing of pregnancy, something we can't necessarily determine. That pre-existing contribution is important. And then just knowing that there are some unknown variables, and just like any financial choice, you have some risk going into the situation that you just need to consider when making these choices. Anything to add to short-term disability?
I think pregnancy aside, it's also just good to have short-term disability for anything like freak accidents or injuries or anything like that. My manager when I was working for a company, an outpatient company, tore his ACL, and he was able to use short-term disability to have the surgery and start his rehab. Then he was able to kind of come back, after a couple of weeks. He was still on crutches, or I guess he was using a wheel around at that point. But luckily he was able to make some money while he was out in the interim trying to get the surgery done. So, short-term disability in my mind is always just, a good way to cover yourself in case something happens, that you need that short, brief period of coverage, kind of a nice little bridge or a gap.
And I think that's absolutely accurate, and also may depend on the family dynamics, right? So if depending on the premium, especially if your company offers it for free, like if they offer a basic plan for free, then you're there, right? And if it's expensive and you're maybe at a starting salary and you don't have a lot of extra income to put towards a short-term disability plan, you may have a spouse or a partner or someone else who has an income. So if you had an injury, they could cover you for that period, knowing that you're getting a percentage of your income and you're paying a lot into it. That math has to kind of come from somewhere. So it kind of depends on the family dynamic in that situation.
Yeah, very true.
And the alternative is to save independently for this type of thing, right? So you could do that for short-term disability with or without pregnancy, right? Just knowing if I had enough built up in savings, could I make it 3 months, if I didn't work? Or can I save for my maternity leave, knowing what I would need for that, however long you want to take off, right? Is it 8 weeks? Is it 12 weeks? Is it 4 months? Is it 6 months? How can you save towards that? So what I ended up doing is I did get paid my short-term disability for my first pregnancy, but I spent so little money when I was on maternity leave because I never left my house, that I just put that money and all my PTO I got from that job, and I saved it for my second pregnancy. So I ended up not doing any short-term disability option for my second pregnancy. I simply carried over my PTO hours when I quit that job, put it in a savings account, and then just lived off of that for the 2 months I took off for my daughter's birth. So the PTO can be used for your leave. You'll have to look at the company policies, but generally you can use all the PTO you have left on your leave in addition to short-term disability or whatever you need as well. So that can be considered sort of a savings account type of usage as well. Thoughts on this?
Well, I was going to add that some companies actually have some regulations that you have to use a certain amount of PTO if depending on how much you have accrued, and so there's a lot of numbers to consider, and every situation is going to have unique components, and it's a very individualized decision. So make sure that you are going through the details of what the numbers are for your situation.
Absolutely. And so that will be usually policy dependent on the institution, right? Do I have to use my PTO? Can I take my PTO with me when I leave? You should know day one of starting the job, so you know how to manage that. If it's a use it or lose it policy, then definitely use it. But if you can carry it over and you're trying to save up, that can be a really good way to increase your savings as well. So Dr. Bizama, did you want to lead this one?
Yeah, well, this goes along with what we were just talking about, the individual considerations, right? So if depending on what your work status is, if you're currently working full-time, you have a certain options. If you're only working part-time, then you might not have access to employer covered type of benefits, like a short-term disability type of insurance policy. And then the other option would be if you're working PRN, you might be able to continue to do some PRN, even through the first few months of the leave. And you might choose to continue to do PRN just to give you that flexibility and not be tied down to a specific work schedule. And then the other thing I was going to point out was there's some tax saving options that you can contribute to, and taxes are not, and money that is not taxed for this type of things like health savings account and flexible spending accounts, so that you can kind of use money for this, for the cost of some of these things that is not taxed, like saving money for the cost of delivery at the hospital, right? Those kind of things, as well as if you're thinking that little one would be needing dependent care, so some type of childcare and things like that, you can take money out of your earnings prior to earnings being taxed and use that that benefit to cover the cost of health or dependent care.
Awesome. So getting into childcare, so probably one of the most complicated personal decisions out there, right? What are you going to do to for managing children when you're working, assuming that you are, you could work full, part-time, et cetera, any of those options, but what are you going to do for your children during those work hours? So when I was working in the outpatient clinic where I worked probably the longest amount of time, I worked 4 10-hour days. So I was at the clinic from 7:30 in the morning to about 6:30 at night. And I worked about 30 minutes from my home. So it was a pretty long day away. And childcare centers of course, are not open that long. And so my spouse is a shift worker. So he's a firefighter. So he's not there every day in the afternoon or the morning necessarily to pick up my child. So I went to my boss after working at this clinic for 4 years, and I said, I need to modify my schedule. And this was after my company was bought out. So my boss said, that's not my problem. And I said, have a nice day. And then I went on maternity leave and I never came back. And I decided at that point to go to a home health position where I worked in various different, I worked in 2 different home health positions until I ended up coming to academia, because the home health landscape was much more flexible to the needs of managing a variable spousal schedule with childcare. That's not to say you can't stay in an outpatient position with children. You just have to be aware of, the options for that, and get into a company that supports people leaving work to get to their children. So with daycare, you can have variable options. You don't have to have 5-day-a-week daycare. You can have 3, 2, 4, whatever options. But they're usually standard options, right? So they're usually like Tuesdays, Thursdays, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. So for those of us that have spouses that work in non-traditional shift work, that doesn't necessarily work, right? Because they're available on an alternating schedule that's not every Tuesday and Thursday. But that might work if you want to work PRN or a part-time for 2 days a week, that you could do a part-time daycare during that option. The other thing to consider is a type of nanny situation, which is generally, in every scenario I've looked at, more expensive because you're one person versus one person. In a daycare setting, you have one person versus 10 children, and then 12 children, and then 15 children, and 20 children as they get older, right? But can definitely be more flexible for the needs of a family. You can have one parent stay at home, which will be family and situation dependent, or additional family or other caregiver support, lending the hand. So if I was going to stay at this company, I was going to have to rely on grandparents picking up my kids on a pretty regular basis, if I was going to work those 10-hour days, which the clinic required. Things to consider in healthcare that other people don't have to worry about as much is we do have unusual hours. We do have to meet the needs of the communities we serve, which include early mornings and late nights. We have inconsistent hours that tend to fluctuate around seasons. So if you worked in an inpatient hospital, sometimes you're leaving early because the census is low, and other times it's overwhelmingly high and you're working overtime. And then we're generally, especially if you're working in skilled nursing or acute care, you're doing those weekend and holiday hours as well. which of course traditional daycares are not necessarily open for. So if you have partner or spouse that can support those times and hours, that's one thing, but consider other options as well. Other things to add for this?
Yeah, so we have two kids, but they're spread far enough apart that only one would be in daycare at one time, which was good. It was a blessing, I guess. But daycare is expensive. I mean, if we had both of them in at the same time, it would have been close to a mortgage payment, if not more. Luckily, because it was spread out, we had the option to try that, but we decided that my wife, if she were to go back to work, it would only basically cover the daycare. So we decided to just let her stay at home and be there with the kids and do the at-home parents. So, you know, with her being a stay-at-home mom, I just worked, and then we used, my salary to cover our finances, and that's worked out really well for us, just because we wanted her to, raise the kids and be home for that, as opposed to a daycare. But yeah, it's tough to navigate sometimes just due to the cost. So that's something that, when planning a family and getting ready to do, is something you've definitely got to start looking into. But also, on top of the cost, getting on a list, if that's something you're wanting to do. Daycares, I mean, as soon as you find out you're pregnant, you need to start looking and searching for a place that's going to work for you, and trying to get on their list, because the wait lists sometimes are just ridiculous. They're enormous. So just something to kind of keep in mind if you are looking into the daycare option.
Yeah, I was gonna mention that the demand is very high, which is why, sometimes it's more expensive than what might expect. And just to get in the schedule, like if you're planning on working a Tuesday and a Thursday, for example, you might have to make sure that you are able to find a daycare that has a spot for your child on a Tuesday and a Thursday within the driving distance of things that will work for your work and things like that. And talking about holidays and weekends, daycare will also have some weeks that they will be closed as well for holidays, or giving their teachers some time off, right? So that's another thing to consider, just the ongoing schedule challenges that will bring, to make sure that you anticipate those as you're planning your work schedule as well.
We've just kind of been rambling. If anyone present wants to ask any questions, you can unmute or put them in the chat. We can pause for that if you guys have any questions. All right, so yes, on the to give numbers to this, right? Because I think in the financial planning and financial literacy world, it's important to give numbers to these things. So daycare, it depends on the city. So I have friends and siblings that live in sort of Seattle, Atlanta, really big major cities. They can spend up to $2,000 a month on one child in daycare. In Austin, Texas, I spend $3,000 a month on 2 children in daycare. And that is pretty average. Maybe on the higher end, you can get sort of in-home daycares for less expensive, but they're usually less hours, or church-sponsored daycares, things like that, are less expensive, maybe $1,000 a month instead of $1,500 a month. They don't necessarily always bring food for your children, so then you're providing food. And they are often, 8 to 2 or 8 to 3 versus the sort of the full daycare time, which is ours is 7 to 6. Pre-COVID, it was 6:30 to 6:30. And then everything condensed for COVID, and hours became smaller, and they never quite expanded back to real working hours. That was the case prior to COVID. So it is a chunk of your paycheck going to daycare. I will say, on the converse of the wife's salary covers the daycare cost, is the career growth that can happen when you stay in the job market. So in the time period where I had my 2 children, I increased my salary by about 30% prior to coming to academia. So just by transitioning jobs and moving to different settings, I was able to get that growth and contribute to basically the cost of daycare by career growth rather than taking a salary away. So you can look at it both ways, and that's going to depend, of course, on family wants, family needs, et cetera, and be a personal choice. Spousal benefits. If you're working and your partner or spouse does not work, there are things to consider about what your benefits can provide for the person that is not with you or that is not working outside of the home. So health insurance, of course, is the main factor. If you're looking at health insurance costs, it's always important to look at the cost and benefit for you and your spouse and your spouse. Try to combine those words there. For you and your spouse, and see if you're both working, which company provides the best option, both in terms of premium and in terms of out-of-pocket maximum, et cetera. Insurance could be a whole nother topic, really, but you want to look at what the benefit is between both organizations if you have two members of your family working. But if the other family member is not working, your insurance, you will usually cover family members, children, et cetera. It's kind of really expensive to add a spouse and then really expensive to add another child, but more children after that seem to not count. So once you get the fourth child, it's like they're free. So just things to consider that once it starts packaging, it does bring down the cost, but adding just one spouse can be quite a chunk on your insurance. My husband works for the city, so his insurance is actually completely free. But if he were to add me, it would be incredibly expensive. And their insurance overall is much worse. So even though his insurance is free for himself, he's actually on our plan because as a large institution, we actually have very good healthcare benefits. So even though I pay for him, his would be free. Because of the out-of-pocket maximum, we spend a lot less going through a paid version. That makes sense. Spousal 401k is something I actually recently just heard about. So you have a 401k if you work for an organization, but you can also set up in some organizations a spousal 401k. So you can kind of set your spouse up in the case that life changes happen, divorce happens, et cetera, so that they have one under their own name. Life insurance policies, right? Especially if you're the primary or the only earner in your family, that you are setting up the life insurance policy for your dependents, your spouse, your children, et cetera, and that you're updating your beneficiaries. So that each year you're going in and making sure that your benefit, so usually a company will have a standard life insurance policy. If you happen to pass away, your family will get $100,000 one-time check. And so make sure that that's going to the right person. So if you're unmarried, it may go to, your parents or your sister or your brother, and then you get married, you make sure that goes then to your spouse. And then you can either decide that it goes to your spouse and your children, or it goes to your spouse and your spouse gives it to your children how they wish. You can set it up however you want. Anything else to add?
Yeah, so for me, I chased the first 10 years of my career. I basically just chased the paycheck. I tried to elevate my salary with every job transition that I made, and I made more money every move that I made. And I probably worked for 5 or 6 different companies in a 10-year span. And I did. I made more money each time I moved to a different company, but I found myself to be relatively miserable. Because even though I was making more money, I was having to take on a lot more work, and it just was not a good situation. Then I realized that at the end of the day, my situation's a little bit unique in that my wife is a type 1 diabetic and a stay-at-home mom, so I carry all the benefits for our entire family. And once I realized that the benefits were actually way more important than the salary, that's when I realized I could kind of supplement my salary with a business, a side business, right? So once I stopped worrying about the salary and just found a company that I enjoyed working for and that was a good fit for me, then I was able to really focus in on finding the best fit for us as far as medical benefits go. Because with type 1 diabetes, it's an expensive pre-existing condition, and not working, she doesn't have coverage. So I have to not only find coverage, but good medical coverage, right? And the medical benefits, like Madeline said, at our university, being a larger university, is excellent. It's the best benefits we've ever had. So for me, I would much rather take a lower salary when I was interviewing and looking for job opportunities. Totally fine with taking that lower salary if it came with a better benefits package, medical benefits package. So that became like a number one priority for me over the last 6 or 7 years. And now that, because I look at that first, that's led me now into the position that I'm in. And again, I'm very blessed. I'm fortunate. I love teaching. I love what I do. But we've also got great benefits too, which kind of takes care of my wife and puts her mind at ease. But on top of that, the salary cut that I would have taken going to any job that had better benefits was not that unsurmountable that I couldn't just make it up on a side business. So, you could work PRN or something like that to try to make it up for sure. But again, you're still getting taxed on that money. And a lot of that, you kind of have to be there in person, right? You got to exchange your time for money. Whereas if you run your own business, there's ways that you can kind of make money. I don't want to say passively, but because even the passive income takes a lot of work. But money, there's things that you can do that either leverage your background to make more money, or to not have to be present to make money, so you're not trading that time for money. So that's the path that I chose. And like I said, when interviewing at places, especially in the last 5 to 6 years, spousal benefits and medical benefits have really been the key determining factor for me and our journey. And it's really worked out, to our benefit. So that's kind of my story with the spousal benefits and why it was so important to us.
Absolutely, I agree. And my husband and I are always kind of competing on who has the best benefits, right? It's like we come home every November when they come out. We're like, who wins? Okay, you get dentist, I get eye doctor, and you're gonna get this. And so it's kind of a fun time to go through the benefits discussion.
The joys of getting older.
Yes.
It's the
And you
little
can,
things in life.
it is. And if you do have people on multiple organizations, you can do some like vision, dental on one and medical on another. And if you really like it, you can do the spreadsheets and see what the cost benefit ratio is of both. And there's sort of the out-of-pocket maximum of the worst possible medical year versus like nothing happens, and what risks you want to take. Again, that will be a future presentation, which we can get into. But just in terms of career growth, because I think I experienced this kind of overt discrimination when I said that I was needing childcare modifications in a situation where was appropriate for other people in my clinic to work less hours, but was not appropriate for me. And so understand that a company cannot discriminate you based on having a family legally, and that they can't ask you about it in a job interview either. So if that comes up, you simply say that's not it. I'd like to focus on what the job opportunities are and what my experience is. And you can just sort of navigate it that way if it does come up in an interview. When I did have to leave my job in this situation, I interviewed for home health companies when I was 8.5 months pregnant. So it was pretty obvious at that point that I was very pregnant, and I ended up getting every job that I applied to. So it shouldn't be an issue. And if it does become an issue, that's sort of a legal issue at that point. If having a family is important to you and part of your future, really take stock of that culture when you're taking the position. You can walk into some clinics or hospitals and kind of get the vibe of what's going on. Like if you see, only young men in their 20s working at this place, kind of ask some questions like, where are the therapists that have been working for 30 years? Where are the women? Kind of get a sense of, sometimes you'll have an interview and then sometimes you'll have time to just get to know the other clinicians there. So that's where you can kind of ask about what you like to do on the weekends. Like, is there anybody there that talks about their families? So get a sense of what the culture is for families in that environment. And then understand your policies and rules for both taking leave, using PTO, as we kind of talked about, what it is to return to work, what kind of happens in the facility policies if there aren't state-specific regulations, right? California, you can take 4 months, no questions asked, you get paid for it. In all those PIG states, that's true. But if not, you have to look at what your company's policies are in that area. And then, sometimes like we have situations where we change jobs, like Dr. Feil may have changed jobs to get different medical benefits, right? Or we change jobs because the situation is no longer working because our family dynamics have changed. You may even be living with, a significant other, and you end up having to move away from that significant other, and you go out of a city or something like that. So you can always frame those job changes as a desire to change growth settings, things like that. You don't have to tell them all the details about why you made those moves, and kind of tell the story on that cover letter that is convincing for your narrative. And then be open to changing positions if needed. Because sometimes you might be like, I'm young and I'm going to go work in a high-paced clinic and I don't really care about any of these things. If you're here listening to this talk, you probably are thinking about caring about these things at one day. So probably not you, but be open that there could be benefits to moving to clinics or settings or hospitals with better cultures. And it's really, you can tell the difference when you're in an environment that's supportive of these things, of having families, supporting your families, and ones that aren't. So it's worth sort of that change, even if it's kind of unsettling. And then develop mentors as early as you can in your career. So these are really valuable, that even if I worked at one company, I developed friendships with people, develop mentorships. And then even if I had to leave, I could call on those people for advice. Like, how did you handle this situation? How did you cover your maternity leave? That sort of thing. It's still, I think we're talking more about salary and physical therapy. I think we still see a lot of, especially women, leave the workforce. And I think we need to kind of address that more and talk about these things a little bit more because of that. So anything you guys want to add? And otherwise it's just time for questions.
Well, just to follow up on you what just said, with a lot of people looking for more flexibility and better match for what is happening in their life at a given moment, I think that we do have a little bit of an advantage now, where the job market is favorable to those entering the job market, maybe not looking for like a really high salary or compensation, but for those extra things, like looking for better health benefits or retirement plan benefits, or the opportunity to have some flexibility with the schedule, or what are some other perks that may come with the job. Will they pay for additional things like continued education or licensure or membership dues and those type of things. So make sure that you are thinking about how you will ask about all of those things in a job interview, as well as if you're thinking about changing jobs, what are some of the priorities for you in your given situation? I can tell you from experience that I value the employees and the team that would approach me as their supervisor early, when they would find out that that we're pregnant and they were going to have to plan for taking off, because that tells me that they are being conscious of the team, as well as it gives me the time to, okay, let's get somebody to cover while you're out, and let's get you to commit to make sure that you're coming back after. When you develop those relationships with your employers, especially with like your direct supervisor and stuff like that, you'll feel good about having those conversations. And if you're in a place that's not valued and you're not feeling good about it, that may be an indication to look for a different place.
Yeah, we're really blessed, I think, in our position, especially with the flexibility part, especially being in Flex, right? The teaching for the Flex program, that gives me a ton of flexibility in my schedule. I can help drop off, pick up the kids, do all those things, be there for games and stuff. And for me, the biggest change most recently was I had to teach weekend labs a lot, and I was totally fine with that when the kids were younger because there wasn't a whole lot of activities and stuff. Now I'm at a stage in my life where there are a lot more games and plays and concerts and things, and so I think it's important, to them that I be there for a lot of that stuff. And so I that's where a lot of my flexibilities come most recently. And that's where the importance has been on the work-life balance. I mean, it's never going to be a balance per se. It's going to be seasons that ebb and flow. But if I can control a lot more of my availability so that I can be present for my family, that now has become a more important part in my life. And that's just the stage that I'm at. So again, I think it's one of those things that you just have to be open to it and realizing that there could come a time and a place where a change may be beneficial and may help you. And it's just about how you frame it and really what you're looking for in that change and that growth. And so for me, the growth over the last 3 or 4 years has really just been about trying to be more available and present for my family now that my kids are getting older and wanting me to be there and participate and stuff with them. So that's been, again, a very good career trajectory for me as of late.
Wonderful. Are there any questions that we can answer? And that's the end of our presentation. So we'll just hang out until the last person leaves or answer any questions that we can.
And is there a link that we have to drop for the certificate or anything like that?
We might. Let me see.
Okay. I can do a little digging for that as well. I feel like
I think I know where it is.
Barbara had sent us that.
All right, here you go. Here we go. I found it.
Excellent.
Any questions for us?
And if not, this is recorded, obviously, so people can always reach out to us at our USA emails. We are more than willing and available to talk about this stuff because we geek out over this stuff, or at least I know I do.
Absolutely.
I think that from our experiences, I wish I would have had more knowledge earlier in my career. And so I think I don't want to speak for you all, but I know that I would have benefited from having a little bit more knowledge to plan things a little bit better, just kind of anticipate some things. And so if we can share from our experiences, that's great.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and end the meeting and thank you all. Have a great day.
Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.